Good afternoon, and welcome to the June 13th meeting of the Energy and Environmental Conservation Committee. I'm Cynette Cavaliere, the chair, and as a tradition, I would like to have the committee introduce themselves, starting with Daniel.
Daniel Moore, I'm a committee member.
Katie Rygg, I'm a committee member.
Pat Schichler, committee member.
Kevin Berry, Town Board Liaison.
Sarah Waterman, sustainability engineer, and then Matt Prenzing, junior planner.
Good. Thank you. Okay, first item on our agenda is the review and approval of the minutes of the May 9th meeting. Can I have a motion to approve them?
I move to approve the minutes of May 9th as written.
Okay, a second?
Second.
Very good. Is there any corrections or alterations needed for those minutes? Okay, all in favor of approving them as written?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Then the next thing is the standing report of the Monroe County Environmental Management Council, which I handed off to Matt last night late, so I don't know if you had a chance to email it out to them. You have it there.
No, they are on the Google Drive, so that you can access them after the fact, but I also have them here now.
So
that we can.
I encourage you to do that. I'm not going to spend any time on it, given the amount of time that we need for some of our agenda items. But it was our last meeting, we had a fascinating presentation from the Cornell, I lost the name of it, Cornell Cooperative Extension on tree health and some of the critters that are impacting tree life right now. So I've done a full on there with some photographs and some better descriptions of the critters. So I encourage you to take a look at that.
And on that topic, the spotted lanternfly, which was discussed at that meeting, if anyone wants cards for identifying them, we have them up at the engineering department counter.
Okay, good. Yeah, I know Daniel had brought us some of those a couple meetings ago, so it's a good thing to be aware of. So moving on from there, is there any questions on that just before I go? Okay. The next meeting for that group is in September and is a roundtable meeting. So as we end our summer meetings, we'll be collecting items for me to share at that meeting. Okay, on to review of required items. The first one is town development projects. Are there any actions for that?
No actions at this meeting, but just as an FYI, there is a town development project that will be coming before the planning board at the July meeting at 978 State Road, where there's a proposed two-lot subdivision two-lot subdivision that will impact a woodlot EPOD. Right now, they're proposing to stay below the 10% threshold for mitigation efforts, but they will require an EPOD permit to go forward with that. So that would come under the review under EECC. We'll have more details, and it'll be discussed at the public hearing for the planning board at that meeting in July. And then sometime between that July meeting and the August meeting, we would organize the EECC to go and do a site inspection and then have a report ready for review at the EEC's August meeting, and then potentially pass that on to the planning board.
And to clarify, a subset of EECC members would perform the site visit, not the whole committee.
Right. Yes. Yep. So that's all we have now for town development projects.
Okay.
What was the street address again? 978
State Road.
But you said it's just a subdivision, no building.
Oh, sorry. They are proposing 2 homes.
Oh, okay. Because I was going to say normally just site division, we haven't typically gone out if it's strictly.
So there is development.
But there is development with it.
But
okay.
it's single family home.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Next is request from the town board.
There are none at this time.
Okay, thank you. Clean energy community, love saying this. Try it again. Clean energy community actions.
I can cover that. The town was approved for the one-star designation grant from Clean Energy Communities. That grant is for $10,000, and the project that it was approved for was the charging stations we are looking to put in at a town parking lot in the Four Corners area. That development will probably not be completed this year due to other things like construction work going on in town. And the process that it takes to complete that, but we would look to probably start construction next year.
Is there a deadline for using the monies?
3 years.
Okay.
Yeah. And because it's a $10,000 grant, it's not a reimbursable grant. They provide the money prior to us completing construction. So we don't have to fund it and then get the money back.
Okay.
Which is always nice. We are still in the process of applying for the two-star designation grant, which is for the $50,000. And as we'll discuss later in our meeting, the community campaigns are still running for electric vehicles. And last week, the first of this round of community campaigns for clean heating and cooling was completed. And to be clear with that, the first class of that campaign was completed.
Okay. Moving on to old business, and I'm wondering if I hadn't really thought of this for logistics. Should we go ahead and do the public tree law update first, so then we have the larger?
I can do that.
Okay.
Sure. So under old business, item B is public tree law. It's just a small update. The current expectation is that it will be discussed by the town board at their June 26th work session.
Okay, that was easy. Okay, so we'll get into the topic that is the bulk of our meeting here, which is the EPOD code revision, review of comments. First of all, thank you to everybody on the committee for taking the time out to make the comments on the proposed draft that Matt had provided for us. So, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate the town teams that responded back and gave more insight on some of the comments, as well as making some revisions based on our feedback. So I think the goal is to go through these a little bit, pretty much every single one of them. So we did a practice session and it took 2 hours, so we're trying to compress it as much as possible.
And I will let the public as well as the committee members know the comments primarily are under Matt Prinzing's name. That does not mean that Matt was the only one that put these responses together. There is a group of staff that reviewed all of the comments and provided their specific expertise when responding to the comments.
All right. Then I'll jump right into it. First comment was from Daniel, mentioning that several times throughout this document, the addition of adversely alter instead of just alter leaves me to question of what constitutes adversely altered rather than it just being altered without a clear definition. Adversely can be subjective. Leaving it as alter without using the word adversely would allow it to be less subjective. The response from staff was that changes can be neutral or positive. Not all alteration or are negative or adverse. For example, existing soil can be altered when you add compost to it. It's not considered a negative alteration. Soil is also altered when you add oil or other contaminants to it. This would be adversely altering the soil. The reference to adverse impacts is a standard terminology in environmental review. In seeker, you see adversely impact used throughout. Change itself is not bad. Changes that create negative, unmitigated impacts should be avoided to the greatest extent possible. So essentially, leaving it simply as alter would, there are alterations that can be made to EPODs that are fine and are not regulated activities or need regulation. And so it's up to the board having jurisdiction to decide when something is adversely altering or adversely impacting an EPOD. Okay. And that was the first one. And then the next comment, this document is 1,290 words, shorter than the original one. I noticed that the woodlot EPOD is cut significantly than where it was before. I will review that soon. The staff noted that making the regulations easier to read typically results in a reduction of words. Additionally, a lot of our town code utilized legalese that was also removed. Several sections had repeating information that was consolidated under the general provisions for EPOD when they applied to all EPOD types. Additionally, timber harvesting regulations and requirements were removed from EPOD because there are areas in the town where timber harvesting may occur, and they are not all in woodland EPODs.
Are there any questions with that?
Yeah, so far is everything okay?
If it works for the committee, we can go through the comments for each page, and then we can pause for if there's any specific questions, or if Matt finishes a response and there's a question, please speak up.
Right. Moving into establishment of district, Roy, just want to make sure. Yeah, Roy asked, are these defined in each section, or can there be a definition section? Cynette mentioned, as long as the applicability to each EPOD is determined, the names of the EPODs are just a convenience. And then staff mentioned, each EPOD is defined in each of their specific subsections in the delineation description. So essentially, we don't define what a wetland is, but we define what is included in a wetland EPOD.
Yep.
So, yeah. Then moving into the next comment here. General comment from Roy. Should this section mention where and how the EPOD maps will be updated? The timeline for updates should not be codified because the information needed to update maps can change based on a variety of circumstances. It depends on other agencies to provide the information needed. We don't have any control over that. However, the town can establish a protocol for how new information is incorporated into the town's mapping. Kind of like for the tree law and codifying the practices that we have for tree management, mapping management, data management, we can document that outside of the code. All right, and then, yeah, just a grammar change that we're happy to adopt into it. So that's the first page. Any comments so far?
Is there any protocol for how often the EPOD maps are adjusted?
Not currently. And the thing is that I don't know if we can specifically state when the maps are updated, but I think at least, having a protocol of when we search for updates or when we kind of do an assessment of the maps, because it could be that we just simply don't have new information to update the maps with. So if we're required to update our steep slopes EPOD with LiDAR data and we put that in the code and we don't have new LiDAR data to do it with, then the town would be at a cost to pay for LiDAR information, which...
I'm not suggesting that it go in the code at all. I was just wondering, as I've stated before in meetings, I participated when it was Conservation Board, but, it's now many years ago for updating the woodlot EPODs.
So just because it hasn't gone to a committee to review the updates doesn't mean that it hasn't been updated.
Okay.
So that in the first place. Second, there are kind of trigger points that cause staff to do updates or changes. So if a project comes in and it's clear that that project is currently located in an EPOD, but technically it isn't actually, that property would be removed from the EPOD mapping.
Okay.
So there's situations like that, as well as anytime that Matt, since he is the primary staff member that updates maps for the town, anytime that he would get updated LiDAR or he would get updated other documents like wetlands or that kind of thing from the state or from the federal government, then he would make applicable changes as those things happen.
Okay, fair enough.
And that's part of why Matt explained an internal protocol is necessary to be documented.
Moving on to page 2. Katie had commented, can we restrict chemical applications, anti-mosquitoes, bees, herbicides, general pesticides in EPODs? We commented we will check with the town attorney. This might be considered a taking and create grounds for Article 7-8 proceedings. If the products are not illegal, we likely can't or shouldn't restrict their use on private property. EPOD permits are triggered by physical changes to the land. Application of products doesn't require a permit.
It should also be considered that we need to implement code that the town can enforce, and the town can't enforce enforce when someone applies a pesticide or something that doesn't happen, because that can be done outside of staff hours, but also the town would have to prove that happened, and that can end up being pretty costly for the town.
Moving on to the next comment. I feel that, this is Cynette's comments, I feel that section 5 and 6 should include the caveat that the removal of trees for firewood and or landscaping must not exceed the limits of section I3. So that's the mention of disturbances to the woodlot EPOD greater than 10%. And so we made that change. So for 5 and 6, we added that removal of trees must comply with the limits set forth in I3A of this section. So that would be referring to the regulations set forth in the specific woodlot EPOD section. We'll point that out once we get to there, but just to note that that was a recommended change that staff did make. And this is Pat's comment. In terms of residential property, realistically, how would we know someone was required but didn't obtain a permit for tree removal? After the fact, would penalty be imposed? Are residents notified of EPOD changes that affect their property? Not suggested to change, just wondering. Now, for this one, just to clarify, a resident wouldn't be required to obtain an EPOD permit because they're removing an individual tree. But if they were acting, or if they did a regulated activity without obtaining a permit, it'd be very similar how code enforcement deals with a resident not obtaining a permit for any other regulated activity, you know, putting a shed or a deck or something like that. And so that's the case, or that's where code enforcement would be charged with following up with residents and going through the regulations in our zoning code, which deal with violations and
basically, they get reported by somebody.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Cynette had commented, I feel this also needs a connection to steep slope section where a structure may have initially been part of a steep slope management, and the removal of that structure could have an adverse impact on the soils in that area. The term structure here refers to building, dwelling, shed, barn, etc., or an accessory structure like a deck. And we did change the language in this one where it was just removal of structures, but we added this section here excluding any structure associated with steep slope management. So that was a change that we felt that was appropriate. Just want to make sure. Yeah, so also added the exception that an EPOD permit would be needed if removal of a structure for steep slope management was removed. The plan for slope stabilization would need to be issued an EPOD permit to ensure it will be effective and appropriate. Repair and or replacement would still need a building permit to satisfy New York State building code requirements. All right.
As would demolition, to be clear.
Yeah. And it looks like that's it for page 2. Any other comments before we move forward? All right. Roy commented, why is the town suggesting remove the location and types of all existing proposed vegetation and shrub masses, as well as all trees with diameter of 6 inches or more within and or adjacent to the property? I think this is necessary provision unless it is covered elsewhere. These are general requirements, so this first section, application for a permit, all of these are applicable to any EPOD permit. And the specific citation of location and types of all existing proposed vegetation and shrub masses is really only applicable to the woodlot EPOD.
Or steep slope.
A woodlot or
Woodland.
woodland,
or
yeah,
steep
sorry.
slope. It's also applicable to steep slope.
Woodland or steep slope EPOD. So the same way we don't require someone to do a wetland delineation in a steep slope or woodland EPOD, we don't require them to do a tree survey in a, just because they're working in a wetland or a stream EPOD. So there still are requirements for providing the location and types of vegetation, but it's specific to the woodland EPOD. Roy next commented, add the location of all existing wetlands within or adjacent to the property. Katie had followed up, perhaps combine this with number 2, adjacent to the portion. We made a slight wording change to items 2 and 3 to capture adjacent conditions to the project, so looking back at 2 and 3. So the location of all EPODs, designated town open space, town, county, or state parkland within the proposed project area and within 200 feet of the project area boundary. And we made that consistent, not just in 3 here, that 200 feet of the project area boundary, but also number 4 there. But Roy's initial comment of wanting to add existing wetlands, all of the existing wetlands are mapped by our EPODs. So saying that they would have to delineate wetlands is kind of redundant because they are already doing that by showing where the EPODs are on the property. So we didn't feel it was necessary. It's different for number 7. It's 7 cites the location of all existing and proposed water bodies. Not all water bodies are mapped by our EPODs. The instance, so like a stormwater conveyance, like a ditch that may be considered, that would be potentially be considered a water body, wouldn't be included in our stream EPOD or our wetland EPOD, and so that's why that is called out. But saying, you know, having an additional item 8 to show wetlands seems redundant since we already require them to show the wetland EPOD if it exists on that site area. Moving on to this one. The original section referenced referring to boards for the review, was that in reference to the Conservation Board? Was this removed as it is inherent that it will be forwarded for review if necessary? The current code specified the individual boards by name. We've universally replaced this with boards having jurisdiction to make it easy to read. The board that has site plan review and EPOD jurisdiction varies based on the zoning district and where the project is located. That's why the reference to boards was updated. The EECC, like the Conservation Board before it, is advisory and doesn't have approval or denial authority.
So, and in addition to that is, as the town staff continue to review all of the different codes and make changes, like the town code for the town, we are continuing to update where it has boards and not one specific board. It'll continue to be updated to boards having jurisdiction.
Okay.
Roy mentions proposed the addition of or authorized agents. We did add that so that, you know, this includes that authorized agents would be members of EECC or it would be a consultant for the town, whether it's a landscape consultant or architectural consultant, you know, as the case may be, whatever the town needs for a particular project.
Authorized agents.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that change
Incognito.
has been made. So this is, this was a case where
Oh, that's one of the sections that's common in all of the sections.
Yes.
So you're noting that consolidation.
It was moved from a lower section after this document was provided to the EECC members, and staff felt it was best to move it up to this general section.
Yeah, so it wasn't necessarily a reflection based on EEC comments, but it was upon further review, staff felt that, yeah, it's applicable to all, so it belongs in this section.
Pulling out more words.
Right, yeah.
Well, it sounds like they moved it upwards rather than...
We moved it
One of those.
upwards.
We'll find
Right.
a couple of those where they had the same clause in every single one, and it just made sense to put that in as a general clause, as a, if it's going to apply to all of them.
Sure.
This is another case of that. This was specifically just in the steep slope EPOD, but we felt that it applied to all EPODs. I'll just read it out. The authorized official or board having jurisdiction shall consider whether there is any reasonable alternative for the proposed regulated activity to take place on another portion of the site to avoid the EPOD. So seeing that that could be the case for any EPOD, not just steep slopes.
Can I just ask you, when you added the person or authorized, can you go back to the earlier part?
The authorized official, that portion?
Yeah, is that what you called it
Authorized
previously?
agents, yeah.
So, no, so those are two different things.
Yeah.
So
That's what I was-
authorized agents EECC members could be considered an authorized agent once
Okay.
they are requested to do a site visit. Authorized officials could be a town board member visiting a site,
Right.
or could be a staff member visiting a site, similar things like that.
I just want to make sure you wanted to keep the differentiation between agent and official.
Yep.
Okay, all right.
Let's see.
That one, yeah.
Get that chameleon out of the way.
Roy commented, what does this mean? Who determines what is reasonable? The board having jurisdiction with guidance from town engineer, town consultants, and advisory boards or committees are the ones who determine what is reasonable. There are cases where steep slope, so I guess this is a case where we copied comments from when this did exist in the steep slope EPOD, but again, you could use it as a use case. If there are cases where steep slope construction may not be avoided, in those instances, mindful engineering and design are required and ensured through these regulations. And this is just saying that we moved it from steep slope to this section F. Right. And
Do I have to scroll up a little? Toby? You skipped the Pat's comment. Scroll down a little.
We had a couple
there we go.
sections where we stacked
Okay.
all the comments.
Okay,
Oh.
yeah.
So you had skipped that one.
this was another one that
Pat.
Pat had added. So it was mentioned or asked, is cost to the developer a contributing factor when determining whether there is no reasonable alternative? As town staff just needed more information to understand and respond to this question, just because, it's, I think that the board having jurisdiction, it's not often that we can have an accurate estimate or an idea of what the cost to the developer.
Right.
So I think generally no, because we have no way of really estimating that.
And it's not provided to us.
And it's not something that's really provided to us. So yes, I think it's safe to say that generally, no, that's not a determination. But yeah, I mean, do you feel that satisfies your comment? Or?
Yes, I just, I figured the answer was no, cost isn't a consideration, but I could just, there'd be different times when we did site reviews and perhaps some of the responses would be, well, this would be cost prohibited, that's why we're asking for this, and so I didn't know if that ever came into a factor.
So that does not affect any staff responses, and we can't speak for the boards of jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fine, just, more of discussion items.
Mm-hmm. Get back to where we were. Okay. This is another case of something being moved up. It was in one of the before the EPOD sections. The application for an EPOD permit shall have the burden of demonstrating that the proposed regulated activity will be conducted in accordance with the standards and requirements set forth in this chapter as required by the authorized official or board having jurisdiction. So this was an item that was in some of the sections, but not all. But it is the case for the applicant to state their case for that proposed activity being conducted in accordance. So that's, yeah, it made sense to add it to this permit review section. I guess we kind of transitioned pages there. Are we still feeling good about comments so far? Okay. Yeah, so that's just jumping to the next page.
So
right?
I think you finished for page 4
Yeah,
as well.
page 4 is complete there. Pat comments, are there ever penalties imposed if there is egregious violation of the permit, i.e. permit allows for certain trees to be removed, however the developer cuts the woodlot? Staff commented, generally, rather than have a line item for the EPOD in the letter of credit fund, the town will withhold letter of credit releases, building permits, and C of Os until the remediation occurs. So essentially, if they go beyond what they've proposed to cut down, then the town holds on to those funds that they put up at the beginning of the project that any development project would have. And so there's not additional penalties, but the town holds on to the funds and doesn't release them until they feel that the developer has, gone back into compliance with their original proposed project.
That's fine. I just wanted to hear if there was a consequence. So.
And that's how the town currently handles those situations as well.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Katie comments, can the town enforce any kind of remediation? We're continuing to check this with the town attorney, but ultimately the state and Army Corps are better suited to enforce remediation. Their regulations have more weight. Local town codes have limits on the extent of enforcement. Over a certain amount of fine charges, the scope of the town court proceeding changes the scope of the town court proceeding may exceed local jurisdiction and require filing to the state Supreme Court, which ultimately is very costly to the town. And so, I mean, this is one, but ultimately many of the changes that we make throughout the EPOD code is trying to make sure that the town is kind of balancing the need to place protections, but also make sure that everything in the code is legally defensible. So, and this is a case where we're ultimately trying to find the best balance that we're having protections that are ultimately legally defensible. So,
and enforceable.
And enforceable, sorry, yeah. All right, now Roy commenting that wetland is never defined. What does it mean when it says the town will defer to state wetland regulations set forth in New York State environmental conservation law, as well as the federal wetland permitting requirements as established by the United States Army Corps of Engineers? What does that mean? What does that mean the town is adopting those requirements by reference, or that the state requirement supersedes the town requirements? And staff responded, it means the state and or federal requirements are part of the town's requirements. Later in this section is discussed that the requirement of a state or federal permit as well. And we had discussed this with Cynette too, is that there is a definition of wetland in the town code, but it's not necessarily applicable for the EPOD, and really for the definition of what's included in a wetland, it's really only applicable to what we mention in the delineation section here. And so when it comes to what is included in the wetland EPOD, we defer to state and or federal requirements.
As well as their mapping.
And yes, right. And so I believe that's going to put us just through page 5. Any comments? Any follow-up on page 5? All right. Moving into 6. Weir requirement, I would think we would want the applicant to demonstrate the activity will not produce adverse impacts. So that was a change that we did make. So now it's demonstrate that regulated activity will not produce any of the following adverse impacts. So that was just a typo on our part and missing that. Steep slope EPOD definition and just asking for that. So we did add in clarity in the delineation of district boundaries here, so that steep slope EPOD shall be delineated on the town's EPOD maps and shall include any area with a slope of 15% or greater. So that is what the steep slope EPOD includes. We've also added a check zone of 25 feet from the map steep slope EPOD boundaries will also be identified on the map. Also at the end of this, there's additional definitions that will be added to the zoning chapter, and there's a definition for a check zone. Roy asks, why the change from 50 feet to 25 feet? Ultimately, when this was originally added, it was 50 feet, but the engineering department, now knowing that the data that we have, the LiDAR data accuracy is within 1 foot accuracy, so we feel confident that within that 25-foot check zone, we can accurately say where the steep slopes are and what impacts will be potentially made in that check zone. So that was the change that we felt we could make for reducing the size from 50 feet to 25 feet.
And that area, that 50 feet used to be included in the steep slope and is now only, the 25 feet is included in a check zone.
Right.
So it is not technically a steep slope area, it is the area at the toe and the top of the slope.
Right. All right, that's page 6. Any follow-up on that? Roy gave us kudos for a good addition for adding timber harvesting for personal or commercial use as the regulated activities that require an EPOD permit. And so
the comment that triggered it was the one by Roy, I thought. So if you scroll up a little.
Yes. Is consultant the right word? Yes, we have a contract with several design consultants. Landscape is one of them.
Upon further review, it was determined that landscape was not the only one that could possibly be applicable in this situation, so we updated it to remove landscape. Mm-hmm.
And Pat had also mentioned, should this individual have specified credentials? Staff comments that credentials are specified within requests for proposals, or RFP, and appendices with resolutions. It does not need to be codified. So essentially, if a project required certain credentials, then that would be added into the RFP.
I think making it just consultant versus landscape consultant also clarifies that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cynette highlighted this section. I see this in a couple places referring to amended or changed. Why not just say current criteria? Titles of reference documents change. This statement helps ensure the code stays up to date even if the document title reference changes in the future. It's also a call to action for somebody to make sure that they are referencing the most current version of the document. So essentially the town's construction and design criteria may be amended or changed. So if somebody, a developer is reviewing this and they see as amended or changed, it's a call to action to go and check with the town engineer, planning department to see if they have the most current version. All right, that's page 7. Keep moving along. All right. So all erosion protection structures, Cynette commented, this is where I feel the exempted activity number 7 is in conflict. We specified the steep slope stabilization structures are not included in the removal of structure exemption. This statement is referencing the need for erosion control structures proposed in steep slope area to conform with certain standards. So essentially,
Essentially, you fixed it in Activity 7. So.
Exactly, right.
Yep.
Okay. This is where this no reasonable alternative for proposed regulated activity to take place on another portion. We essentially moved this, and we already addressed what is reasonable. So that's just citing that was removed from this section but moved to the earlier part of the code, so it applies to all EPODs. And so I just want to make sure we're not missing any other. Yeah, we already discussed that. Okay. Moving into the woodland EPOD. Roy had commented, definition of woodland. Also, what does measurable stands of tree mean? I can measure a stand of trees that are quarter-inch saplings, or I can measure trees that are 3 feet in diameter. The area included in woodland EPOD are defined in the delineation of district boundaries. 5 or more contiguous acres of tree canopy coverage is what is being included in the woodlot EPOD. All references to measurable stands have been removed. How the town currently measures tree canopy coverage will be documented by the Planning and Engineering Department and updated as new standards of practice are made available. So that's kind of getting back to the town documenting our standards of practice for mapping EPODs, and when we look for updates, ensuring that we have some documented way of measuring tree canopy coverage is a goal of going forward. So Roy had mentioned or just commented shrubs. The purpose of the woodland EPOD is to preserve woodlands. The way that we're measuring tree canopy coverage, it allows for us to measure tree canopy coverage using our LiDAR data, and we're able to quantify, those 5 or more contiguous acres of tree canopy coverage, but adding in all areas and measuring shrubs to that degree, we feel that it's not in line or not reasonable for the town to measure that and have the controls of development over those types of areas. And so that's why we don't include shrubs in our estimations of tree canopy coverage for the delineation of woodlands in our woodland EPOD. Roy comments, why 5 acres? Why not 1 acre or 3 acres? He went on to say, how is contiguous defined? For example, is it still contiguous if I have an access road or a stream bifurcates a property? Essentially, just contiguous is we're using our LiDAR data to quantify the area of tree canopy coverage. If any area that's measured in the LiDAR data shows that the tree canopy continues from one area to the next, then that's considered contiguous. We're not, going out and actually surveying to see, whether there's, what the measurement of or the density of tree canopy coverage. It's all based on the LiDAR data that we have available. And then going back to why 5 acres, why not 1 acre or 3 acres? The 5 acres is staying consistent with what was already in the code. Dropping it down to either 1 acre or 3 acres would result in more areas of the town being included in our woodland EPOD, which may be considered a taking, and so we want to ensure that we're staying consistent with what is currently included in the woodland EPOD and making sure that we're designing the woodland EPOD to be legally defensible going forward.
I think you found, looking at other versions of this EPOD, that 5 was pretty consistent across the area.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
It's sad. We wish it could be, as I was questioning, it's like, so if I have 2 4.75s and they're
separated by a road, then.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I guess to more directly, if an access road or stream bifurcates a property or if it splits the tree canopy coverage, then no, then it would not be contiguous, or the canopy coverage is not continuous in that case.
Okay, so so if the road was, or the stream was such that there was enough from the LiDAR that there was a separation, it's not contiguous. Okay.
Yeah. All right. And yeah, so Pat had followed up. I've seen the use contiguous term, meaning the definition even if separated by road, even major or streams, but bears defining. So right, we're looking at tree canopy coverage that is continuous or contiguous touching based on the information that we have from the LiDAR. All right. Is percentage the best metric? Could there also be a call out for large, old growth, ecologically significant trees? The percentage is the most reasonable measurement to document impacts on woodland areas. The town has no way of quantifying or regulating the treatment of large, old growth, or ecologically significant trees. EPOD regulations are designed to regulate construction, timber harvesting, and clearing activities in large swaths of wooded areas as defined by the woodland EPOD boundary delineation. They are not intended to outlaw the removal of a tree on private property. So the key metric that we have to measure these stands of trees of what are included in the woodland EPOD is just canopy coverage. We have no way of documenting, which trees are old growth, which trees are ecologically significant compared to others. So in that sense, it's not enforceable to say that, there are, these specific trees of certain protections to call out those within the district boundaries.
Okay, so this is actually, I hadn't kind of caught that before. So this is 10% of a numeric number of trees as opposed to 10% of the canopy.
No, it's, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it should be 10% of canopy coverage. That's how we implement it, actually.
So then the applicant would need to show that specific, they would have to have a measurement of the tree canopy of individual trees.
No, so the way that an EPOD is delineated is based on LiDAR,
right,
which is based on tree canopy.
Right.
So it's not individual tree canopy, it's a cluster of trees, essentially. It could technically be one if it's a super duper giant tree, but 5 acres isn't going to cover one tree canopy. It's going to cover multiple. If, say, the applicant is proposing a project, say the development affects 15% of the tree canopy within that EPOD, that portion of the EPOD.
Which would mean that they would have to show individual tree canopy coverage, or they'd have to show that by cutting down 5 trees, it's impacting this much of the tree canopy.
Yeah. Which
is basically how this 10% is how the code is currently written. And so
yeah, we didn't like it before, so.
Right.
Well, I think that if you're saying 10% is 10% of the tree canopy, it could be 5 super duper trees, or it could be 20 little trees, and that would cover the old growth versus new growth.
Right. So.
But if you're doing 10% of trees located within a woodland EPOD boundary, then say that portion of the EPOD boundary is 10 acres. And it would essentially be 1 acre of trees. It wouldn't, there would have to be, you would have to know definitively if the project is going to affect the 1 acre or 2 acres or 3 acres, those kinds of things. When we're getting applications, we're getting mapped tree canopy, we're not getting individual trees and what their tree canopy coverage is. Do you know what I mean?
But an EPOD permit application requires you to show trees with DBH greater than 12 inch.
Yes.
So in that case, that's where we get our metric of here. I mean, how it's currently written is that you would have the 10% of trees located within a woodland EPOD boundary. We would be looking at 10% of the trees that are shown on the site plan. So, yeah, I mean, I think this is something we may have to revisit.
I think we should revisit it with staff.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
No. I think that's a great follow-up, and I think that's, we'll have to continue to look at that and see if there's better verbiage we can use to better illustrate
I think we'd appreciate
the type of disturbance that we're trying to quantify in that 10%.
Yeah.
It's good to catch these things up front then when you're trying to apply it. So.
Right.
Well, and it would, I think we could change the verbiage to better reflect how a project would be reviewed with staff and with the Board of Jurisdiction. So maybe, Matt, you can make a comment for us to follow up with that with staff. Yeah. Thank you.
Pat commented in terms of the 10% of trees located within, living or dead. Dead trees can still provide a habitat. So removal of dead trees are exempt from EPOD permitting. And so there's the case of, private property owners should have, or we're giving them the right to maintain their property, remove dead trees that, while they may be valuable for habitat, they could be a risk to damaging property and life or persons. So yes, we're sticking with just trees, as in living trees located within a woodland EPOD boundary.
Are there any questions with that one? Okay.
Then that would be the last one for
page 8.
For page 8. Any follow-up from any of the committee members? No?
So just refresh, there is actually nothing in here that talks about size of trees. It's all based on canopy cover.
No, there is.
Oh, is there something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll call that out.
Call it out when we get there. Just there. It's down in the application component of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, page 9, who determines what an adverse impact is? Where is it defined? See earlier response. We had discussed adverse impacts at the beginning.
And that is the Board of Jurisdiction.
Yeah, the Board of Jurisdiction determines that. Roy commented, just noting we dropped recreational activities and noise from these proposed activities will not impact the following. So we noted that it's worth discussing why. The use of land for recreation activities is up to the discretion of the current property owner. If the owner proposes an activity that will adversely impact the recreational opportunities on their property, that is their right. When conducting site plan review, the board having jurisdiction considers adverse impacts to noise for all activities, not just proposed activities in a woodland EPOD. Therefore, it's not necessary to list it here. So, if there was a development going up, or if there was, some new construction and there was concern that noise from that development would be impacting the neighbors, that is a consideration already made by either planning, zoning, town board when they're reviewing applications. So it doesn't necessarily need to be called out here because it's already part of the site plan review.
And there is a codified noise ordinance.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So this was updated. I believe all it said before was protected wildlife habitats. We added identified by the New York State DEC and U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And so that's where we get our definitions from, is from the New York State DEC and U.S. Fish and Wildlife.
And the New York State DEC and U.S. Fish and Wildlife have specific regulations for certain animals and wildlife.
Right. Yeah, so that's that change. Yeah, so this was just a grammar issue that we changed so that it's barriers around each tree or group of trees intended for preservation. Moving on to this one. Roy mentions that in this item number 5, the way this reads now, the applicant tells you what trees they want to preserve, and those are the only ones that have to be replaced if they are harmed. The applicant identifies trees on their identifies tree preservation on their site plan application. The board having jurisdiction would review that proposed plan and identify any changes or alterations required for their approval. Once the plan has received approval, the tree preservation is considered part of the approved site plan and must be followed. And so if they don't meet that, then that's where we hold their letter of credit funds. And then I just wanted to note that trees being designated for preservation, including supplemental trees. So there are trees that would need to be replaced because they were harmed during construction, but there's also a case where supplemental trees may be needed. And so it's not just trees that are harmed, it's also these supplemental trees that are included in the site plan that are shown. All right, well, that's the end of page 9. Any follow-up on that? No? All right. Roy comments, the replanting and mitigation sections have been removed. I think that they need to be put back in. If the EPOD trees removed by a project are not replanted, there needs to be a fee or tax per tree that goes into a conservation fund for the town to purchase and preserve EPODs. It needs to be written into the code. Pat agrees. See my earlier comment about clear cutting after permits approved. This did happen on a Creek Street development. However, not sure if it was an EPOD. So staff responded, during the plan review process, the board having jurisdiction approves a development plan that shows where trees will be saved and where new trees are going to be planted. The development in a woodland EPOD does not mean that no trees will ever be removed or that the same number of trees will be planted back on the site post-construction. This is the part of the previous code that may have resulted in the town being sued for regulations that constitute a taking of private property. And I just want to clarify, everyone understands what a taking is? Mm-hmm. So essentially, or I don't know if you would want to. Yeah,
I can. So a taking is something that the town attorney has to consider when we are regulating properties. When we're regulating private properties, we have to consider what regulations can prevent from happening on a property, and if those regulations cause so much to be prevented on a property that that property is no longer as valuable as it could be, that is where a resident can take the town to court and essentially say, you are not allowing me to do this on my property. It prevents my property from being so valuable for this reason. And that is where the town attorney would have to argue potentially that it does not do that. The way the code was previously written to include some of these things that Roy's comment is requesting made the town attorney feel that that was not something that the town could enforce, because it would be devaluing property. Does that make sense? Do you have any further questions on a taking in that regard? It looks like there's none.
Okay. And then just a final clarification that for clear cutting after a permit has been issued, that is something we addressed in a previous comment. This is something that may be embedded in the letter of credit held by the town. So I think it would be.
And it could also be addressed by preventing further building permits, preventing a C of O from being issued, which generally means that that building cannot be occupied. Generally, it can also end up going through the code enforcement process of if a property owner is not meeting the requirements of a resolution, which is generally what allows development on a property, the code enforcement department can work with that person, that applicant, and follow up through the court system if necessary. Where were we?
Yeah, there was that one, that comment.
I think we landed.
I think that's where you were.
Yeah.
So now you're on the floodplain.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, moving into floodplain, definition of a floodplain for the purposes of this code. It's in the delineation of boundaries description. Floodplain definition is contained in Town Code Section 120-4. This is a section of code that addresses the town's flood damage prevention. So yes, it's a case where we, include in the delineation of district boundaries what's included in the flood EPOD, but there are definitions for floodplain within the town code as cited there. Yeah. And yeah, so just needed to fix that numbering issue. And yeah, that was really it for floodplain, just the comments at the top there. So moving into stream EPOD, definition of stream for the purpose of the CPOD code. So again, stream EPOD is defined as portions of properties within 75 feet of the center line of a natural or man-made stream, creek, or tributary as classified by the New York State DEC.
And because it's classified by the New York State DEC, the town does not implement an additional definition for stream.
Right. And the boundary shall not include drainage swales is the other caveat of that.
Yep.
So that's it for page 10. Any follow-up on that? No. This is, we're still in the stream EPOD, and we're looking at exempt activities. And Katie had mentioned that the customary agricultural operations being exempt seems exceptionally permissive for farms. Is there a separate code for customary agricultural operations? So we just wanted to call out that it's not as if all customary agricultural operations are exempt from like all of the activities for customary agricultural operations are exempt. It's just the clearing regulations. So essentially, they are exempt from the clearing permission, the clearing activities. Because if a block stream impacts drainage in a farm, it causes flooding of fields, pastures, etc., which would impact farming on operations. They still, so like in regulated activities, item C, any activity which would alter the natural flow pattern of a stream, creek, or tributary, they still have to, like that is still a regulated activity. They cannot, a customary agricultural operations cannot change the natural flow pattern of a stream, but they can clear the stream if that stream is causing flooding on their property. So it's just, we realize that there's, like this section is pretty unique to this EPOD, where we're citing that just these clearing regulations are exempt activities.
And that's because of how the regulations are set forth in Ag and Market in New York State.
Yes.
So the way the Ag and Market regulations are, we need our code to reflect that for clearing, they are exempt.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's there.
It's page 11.
So that is the end. That would be the end of the EPOD code, and then this is essentially stating that timber harvesting is going to be moved into its own separate article. Well, yeah, it would be within Article 7. There were no comments from EECC on that. And then we just noted that we added this check zone definition. We borrowed language from New York State DEC. So it's an area mapped around a EPOD in which the actual EPOD may occur. If a regulated activity encroaches into this area, applicants will be required to contact the town engineer to make a determination if an EPOD permit is required for the activity. So again, we only use check zone for the steep slope EPOD, and the check zone, again, is not part of the EPOD, but applicants proposing activity in that check zone would require that contact with the town engineer to make that determination if an EPOD permit is necessary.
And the reason for that is because there are some situations that work just outside the EPOD boundary would cause an effect to the EPOD. Right. Specifically at the top or bottom of a steep slope. Say a large structure was put directly at the edge of a steep slope, further considerations have to be made for that project. Do you want to keep going through the definitions? We wanted to also address, so it's clear for the public as well as committee members, the line through tree preservation zone, its definition, and woodland protection district means that those two definitions are being removed from the definition section of the zoning code. They're being removed because they are no longer applicable and no longer appear in the zoning code with these changes. So it is just kind of like a clerical update. With track changes on, we wanted to make sure that was clear for everyone.
That's the end of it.
It is. So first off, thank you to the committee members for reviewing this document. It is so very dense, and staff has worked on it for months. So thank you. We recognize there's a lot of time commitment for that. And all of your comments have been very valuable. They've caused us to make changes that you didn't even bring up because they relate to your comments. So thank you so much for going through that. At this time, I think we should follow up with, are there any further comments from committee members or questions about this code?
I think we have the one section that needs some clarification. Are there any others? I mean, I think always we wish we could put more in to be protective, but we also understand that you're running that fine balance between doing something protective of the environment while taking away somebody's ability to use their property.
And part of our consideration has to be, is the code enforceable? Yeah. And that can sometimes be discouraging for residents when they're reviewing our code. But if it's not enforceable, there's no value to it. So that's something we strongly had to consider with the updates. The big question that we have for the committee members are you generally supportive of these changes? Because that's going to be a question that we feel the town board would want to know.
I think so. If it clarifies, and just in the going through of it, you know, we've seen that, well, how do we do this versus the way, you know, try to make a map, is that one issue that came up is a tree canopy. Mm-hmm. And then I can see where it would fall back on numbers of trees, you know, and how it causes you to really rethink the process and make sure that in some ways application of the code is in the back of your mind so that it's, you know, clearly written. Mm-hmm.
I guess I would comment that, you know, philosophically, dead trees do have value. So that one kind of doesn't have to be here, and maybe it'll be better in the town tree code, but I think that that's just an important new framing that I think a lot of people don't know about. You know, if there's no danger to people, if there's no danger to structures, you know, that's a really good option to just leave it. And I don't know where to reflect that.
I think in how I've interacted with residents in the engineering department, because it's not uncommon for a resident to come to the town staff and say, I'm worried about my neighbor's tree falling on my property, or I'm worried about this tree falling down, and what is the liability for me with that dead tree? It's hard for the town hearing that and not, I mean, the town has no say. It's a liability issue, it's a civil court issue, so it's hard for the town to regulate not removing dead trees when it can be a liability issue, and the town doesn't get to determine if it's a liability issue, because again, it falls to civil court, not town court. So I do see the value. I think the biggest thing that I think maybe this committee or maybe community groups can do in town is to educate residents on what the value of those trees are, and how it benefits us to have dead trees on our property.
And they can be managed in a way that makes them safe.
Yes.
With leaving parts of it. So, yeah. Okay. I think, education is so often the answer.
It is. And I hate to sometimes be the staff member that says education is hard, but it is. And the town, I believe, is working harder through staff and through communication to do more education. And as I've worked closely with you, Katie, specifically with Color Penfield Green, to help with some communication efforts, I think town staff also really appreciates the residents that are doing that as well. Yeah.
So from my perspective, watching the crew that did the last Woodland EPOD review, I think this, even with the one not fully fleshed out part, this is going to be a lot easier to be black and white in the applicability of. And I think that's critical, because the other one, it just seemed like there were so many gray areas in how it was written before. So I do like it from that perspective. I also like that it's like half the size as a lot codified set of words.
And a lot of the reason that it's smaller is because there were portions that were applicable to all of the EPODs. And we went through, and every time it said environmentally overlay protection district, we made it EPOD. So like every time we did that, it took 3 words out. And consider that for a lot of the acronyms within it. Yep. So I can see how at first glance having such a reduction in words was surprising.
I would also like to say I am very new to all of this procedure, but it's pretty clear that Roy is not, and he's pretty, he's very
thorough, passionate about it.
Cares a lot about it. And so while I could say I like, generally speaking, what we've talked about here, I guess I would like to say I think Roy should also be able to weigh in, because so many of those comments were his, and he hasn't been able to respond to the changes.
Right. And unfortunately, I think very much the ones that Roy did, and you did as well, Pat, are more of the more protective areas that, from a town lawyer perspective, are harder to actually put in place. And it's the same sort of thing. I wish that there was, we did the town tree component of it, of trees that are actually owned by the town. It's almost like we wish we could put our arms around all of them, but we don't really get that ability to do that. So I think that's also where some of this hopefully can come into with the conversations that are had with developers and people impacting the property, to say, hey, we know you're taking down a lot of trees, can we really encourage you to consider some alternatives, but it'll have to be more of the soft version instead of the hammer.
Well, I think, too, when I first joined the committee, it was kind of a revelation, maybe it was just my naivete, is that just because there's an EPOD doesn't mean people can't do anything within that EPOD. They just have to stay within the strictures of it, provide mitigation, and so on. And some of the comments I made, or issues brought up, I suspected that they would be answered in other areas. So I perfectly understand that. Well, this is the application permit, this is the code, and then violations are dealt with elsewhere, in a separate series of procedures. So I, can fully understand that.
Okay.
So overall, we're happy that we get to be part of the process. We feel good about what we put in as comments, and yet we're probably slightly disappointed that there can't be more teeth in protecting trees and the environment. Am I speaking well for everyone in saying it that way? But it's better than it was. And so to me, it needs to go ahead and move forward as as the next step.
And I look at it when things are made more easily able to be applied, that is going to have the effect of saving more and not being able to wiggle around maybe what was stated because there's ambiguity. So in the long run, better application of the code, because it's an easier code to understand, will benefit in protecting more trees.
We appreciate that feedback.
Okay, that said, I think we get to move on to next agenda items.
I think that's reasonable.
Yeah.
Okay. Which happens to be, how are we doing here? We're doing really good. New business.
Sorry.
Upcoming events. What we have going on is, I don't know who wants to talk about it.
I was going to ask, and if you don't want to, I can do it. But Katie, would you mind giving a little bit of a plug to the EV 101 class for the community campaign?
I would be so happy to. Thank you. We have a great team of very passionate EV owners and EV enthusiasts who have come together to do a 2-session class. The first session will focus on EV basics, advantages, disadvantages, the makes and models that are available, how to select an EV, and then really important, the credits and rebates that are available to make them affordable. Session 2, you'll hear from residents about their experiences. You'll hear from, in the past we've had local dealers, that's the goal, that's the idea. We're also going to talk about winter driving and navigating that, road trip planning, EV lawn equipment, and so it's thank you for posting that. This is how you register for this class. There's, I believe I think we're trying to make it hybrid.
That's my understanding. And for registration, that can be through the rec website, the Penfield rec website.
Right. And there's an afternoon class, 4:30 to 6, and an evening class, 7 to 8:30. And if you should register and discover that you can't make one or both, we are recording the sessions and we will send you the recordings.
Yes, so please register even if you think you can only attend one.
Yes, absolutely.
How many of these opportunities that do get videoed do we put a link on our sustainability page?
So for these community campaigns, the town staff portion is often the before and after, and less of the participation in the presentation portion. So there's resident volunteers that are actually presenting the classes. Previous to this class, and possibly moving forward, The recordings have been made a private link on YouTube. So truthfully, I have not requested it to be on the town website at this point. But anytime that a resident has requested the information, that link has been forwarded to them. I think it might be reasonable that we see if the volunteers are interested in that being on the town website. And that might be a step forward.
Okay. I guess that makes sense. I was looking at what was on the website, and it was presentations by members of the committees at the time. So that made sense. Okay.
This is part of a bigger campaign, and we're hoping that residents will connect with the town if they have purchased an EV. Would you speak to that a little bit more, Sarah? Thank you.
So I touched upon it briefly at Clean Energy Community Actions. I'd like to explain that a little further. The EV 101 class and the class that was completed last week for clean heating and cooling are part of community campaigns under Clean Energy Communities. Clean Energy Communities is a kind of like an incentive program for towns through NYSERDA, and that often in the past has led to some grant funding for the town to implement some sustainability and energy efficiency activities and projects. That's where I touched upon the designation grant that is allowing us to put electric vehicle charging stations in the Four Corners area. This community campaign for EV 101 and the separate campaign for clean heating and cooling are both part of the actions that can lead to future action grants for the town to again implement those initiatives and projects. If the town can present that enough residents have purchased an EV and or enough residents have purchased a heat pump for their property and had it installed, then the town can move forward with getting more action grants. The next step in those action grants are $7,500 for each of those actions. So if you are a Penfield resident and pay Penfield taxes, town taxes, which is what qualifies you as a Penfield resident in this situation, and you have purchased an EV or purchased a heat pump since 2021, your purchase or installation can be part of this program, and the town can get credit for that. For the town to get credit, all that we need is a purchase agreement or receipt from that purchase and installation. So if you would like to be part of this and help the town towards those action grants, feel free to reach out to me at Waterman, which is WATERMAN, at penfield.org, or come on into the town hall and find my face in the engineering department. I am happy to help you. And Matt just brought up the different tiers for the electric vehicle community campaign. We have completed the tier 1 for both electric vehicles and clean heating and cooling. We are considered a small to medium town or municipality. So we've actually, at this point, exceeded that requirement of 5 participants, and that is part of why we're moving forward with the tier 2 and that potential action grant of $7,500. So please feel free to reach out. We would love for you and your interest in both the community campaign and class, as well as if you have made a purchase and or installation.
Okay, good. And thank you, Katie, for really, you and all of Color Penfield Green for spearheading these for us. It's been such a valuable organization to come alongside us for that. Okay. Any other new business?
Not at this time.
I was going to say, I actually do have one thing that I thought of was just to make sure that everybody had caught that the notice had gone out for new members if they had been interested. That deadline has actually passed.
Oh, I do actually have a note on that. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
It's in my notes.
Yeah.
So I did want to acknowledge that the town did receive applications for membership for this committee. It's my understanding that the town board will be performing interviews for those applicants. I don't know if it's every single one or just a portion of them, but it's my understanding the town board will be performing interviews, and I don't currently have a time frame for that.
That's fine. But we did get the moving forward for 2 new members, so that will be very welcome for the workload that we've been working on. Okay, any other new business? Okay, at this point, I get to, let's hit the next item. The next meeting is July 11th. Same time, same place, so we hope to see everybody there. And at this point in time, I call this meeting of the June 13th Energy and Environmental Conservation Committee closed.